If you have been with us from the beginning, you now realize that Dante Domain Manager is a truly powerful solution that does so many things for your Dante network. This chapter focuses on what we like to call external services. These services interact with other applications on your network and provides a seamless integration with already existing services. Be sure to check with your Audinet sales rep to understand which feature is available with each version. Our focus will be on 3 external services: Email Alerts Server Integration, LDAP, and SNMP. Because of how powerful DDM is, as we add new features and integrations, keep checking back in to see new additional learning modules. One of the first external services that we'll be diving into is the DDM's email server integration. DDM is able to connect to an external email server to generate email alerts. And this is particularly useful for managing your Dante network and adds another layer of visibility to import information. Please note that the DDM itself does not run an email server and is integrating with an existing server. Check with your IT department for more information on this. The email alerts you receive directly correspond to the alerts shown on the DDM dashboard. These can also be used for password resets. We'll take a look at this in detail in the next slides. The use cases for this are quite varied. You could potentially use the email associated with the in-house support team, or emails could be sent to external resources. This would of course depend on your remedial process. With this integration, no matter where you are in the world, you can receive alerts when things go wrong in your system. Let's take a look at the configuration. Navigate to Settings, External Services. If you toggle the button on Status, you'll see the fields that need to be filled. You'll need to know the sender address, host name, port, encryption, and credentials. This information might need to be obtained from the team managing the organizational email system. You can also choose your encryption, which could either be SMTPS, which is SMTP over TLS, or Start TLS, which is a protocol command that instructs the email server that the email client needs the email to be encrypted. Confused with all that terminology? No need to worry. SMTP and mail server processes have been around for a long time, and a quick search can reveal lots of information on this. Work with your IT departments to gather the information, and as always, if this is a requirement, let's start the communication process early on. Once you get the email server configured, you will see the option to configure your email notifications under Settings, Alert Notifications. This page allows you to specify the email address to send alerts to. You can also select the type of alerts you want to send to that email address. This way, you are not flooding your inbox. That wasn't too bad, was it? Let's do a hands-on demo. Go to the Settings External Services, and the first step is to enable the email option. After that, we need to fill in all this information. As you can see, I'm entering the sender address followed by the host name and port information under server details. Note that I'm leaving the encryption as none, which is accurate in this example, but do confirm the details with your IT department. Finally, enter the credentials, which is a username and password, and click on Save Changes. We can get more granular with the settings by going to Alert Notifications under Settings. Toggle on the email notifications, type in the email that'll be used for the alerts, and in our case, we're going to leave all the options checked so we can receive alerts on everything. Don't forget to click on Save Changes. Let's go to our email server. We see that we don't have any messages yet. Let's try triggering a few events and see how the system responds. We go to Dante Controller and send 64 channels from our mixer to the stage box. We will immediately see that we just received an email alert. If we select it, we see that the latency for the stage box in the hardware domain is too high. If we remove the stage box from the network, we will receive another email alert saying that the device stage box in the hardware domain is offline. We see lots of other messages coming in, and this can truly become an important part of your support mechanism. Now let's talk about DDM's integration with LDAP. LDAP stands for Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. It's an open, vendor-neutral, industry-standard application protocol for accessing and maintaining distributed directory information services over an IP network. It enables people to locate things, like an organization's individuals or other resources like printers, devices, and files in a network. LDAP is commonly used to provide a central place to store usernames and passwords, allowing many different applications and services to connect to the LDAP server to validate users. An example of LDAP in action many people are familiar with is when you are connected to your work email, and when you start typing a coworker's name, their email address auto-populates. Let's look at LDAP in the context of Dante Domain Manager. Say we were trying to sign into Dante Controller and type the username Groot with the password I am Groot. Local users within the DDM would be validated by the DDM server and granted access. But when connecting using LDAP, the information is passed to the LDAP server for validation. Once authenticated, the user will have access based on the assigned privileges. The LDAP integration adds individuals who are specified in the LDAP settings of DDM to the user pool. The LDAP users can log into the DDM user interface and Dante controller using their credentials from the directory server. This is quite advantageous in a scenario with a large number of users, without which you would end up having to create local users on the DDM. This is also inefficient as you are essentially maintaining two user databases. The integration process begins with connecting to the LDAP server. For that, go to Settings, then External Services, and enable LDAP. The LDAP account connected must have sufficient permissions to search the LDAP database and read all relevant user records. Remember, write access is not required here. The first thing you need to know about is the hostname or IP address. In this example, we are using an FQDN that uses DNS to point to the LDAP server instead of an IP. We also need to determine the port we are using to connect to the LDAP server. Typically, the port is going to be determined by the type of encryption you are doing. In this case, the system is localized and we are not using encryption. But most of the time, you would be using either *TLS or LDAP-S. If you use *TLS, the port will be 389, which is the same as none setting. And for LDAP-S, it will be 636. From a configuration point of view, there is not much difference between using LDAP-S or *TLS. Only the encryption type and port differ. And due to the deprecation of LDAP-S, we recommend you to use *TLS on port 389. The next thing to enter is the credentials required to connect to your LDAP server. Binding is the step where the LDAP server authenticates the client, and if the client is successfully authenticated, allows the client access to the LDAP server based on that client's privileges. So the CN, or common name, is going to be the username of the account that you are using to log into the LDAP server with sufficient privileges. As mentioned before, the DDM is read-only when communicating with LDAP server. So this username doesn't need to have write access privileges. With LDAP, a lot of times there will be usernames set up that are admins, but they are read-only admins. They can see everything in the LDAP database, but they can't write into it. Dante Domain Manager is not writing anything to your LDAP database, it just needs read-only access to pull user information. Then you have the DC, Domain Component option, which represents the top of an LDAP tree using usually your company's name as DC equals company, DC equals com, or whatever you've set it up to be on your own network. If these were ordinate, it would be DC equals ordinate, DC equals com. Or if these were Google, it would be DC equals Google, DC equals com. Then you just need to enter the password for that account. Once complete, you can test the connection here. It'll give you a nice little check mark if everything's gone well. The user object attributes are really important. These are used to make sure that we're pulling the proper attributes for our users. The search root is what group we're searching within, meaning the organization units and domain to search in. If you don't type in a group, it tends to populate a lot of missing information. So I recommend you type in a group and then the network domain you are searching. The final thing you need to know are the attributes required for DDM user profiles. What we need is the name, username, and email. So if I had a user called administrator who tries to log in, the Dante Domain Manager will search the LDAP subtree for people in the domain for a node with CN equals users. The administrator's email will be extracted from the LDAP attribute. Typically for Active Directory, this is the mail attribute. The username attribute is going to be extracted from SAM account name, and its display name will be extracted from the name attribute. Now, once the LDAP server is connected and the option in DDM activated, you will see a new tab called LDAP Groups appearing on the left side of your menu. The LDAP Groups panel is used to define groups of Active Directory users for the assignment of DDM privileges. So if you want to give someone a special site administrator access, you just do a query with the user SAM account name attribute equals whatever that user's ID. For example, SAM account name equals A. Edwards. You could also query for all the users in the AV department using the query department equals AV. Once you type the LDAP query, this will return the LDAP nodes belonging to the users in the group. And when you click in the Task Query button, it will list the users who match the current query. Remember when you create new LDAP groups in DDM, those are not the LDAP groups in your LDAP server. They are specific to DDM. So name them like operators or volunteers, site administrators, tech directors, or whatever fits the function. The name you put there doesn't matter. It's the query you are using to pull in users that matters. Another important thing worth noting here is that a user can be a member of more than one group. Their privileges add together between groups. Domain-specific privileges override default privileges for a particular group, but will not remove default permissions granted by a different group. So let's see a demonstration. If we click on the LDAP Groups panel, one has already been created. I'm going to create a second one to demonstrate the process. Let's set this up group as Midrooms Techs. Remember that this name is relevant only within DDM and doesn't relate to your LDAP server. Then in the query, I will enter the full binding for that query that will pull the members that I want. Now, we test the query and look. We've just retrieved a list of users. In this exercise, I want these individuals to only have access to the meeting rooms. Similar to how we've done in the previous chapters on domain roles, we will set the default role as none and give media control access to the Business Center meeting room domain. If I go now to the Users tab, then LDAP Users, we'll see that once the LDAP user logs in with the proper credentials, it will show up. Just be aware that the user will not show up in the list prior to them logging in for the first time. Once they log in, you will be able to see their recent actions in the user profile. So let's have Bernie access the DDM. Enter Bernie's credentials. We see that Bernie only can see the meeting rooms domain. And if we go to Dante Controller and enter his credentials again, he can only see and move some parameters for the meeting rooms domain. Let's log out from his account and enter as an admin. The user Bernie is now seen in the Users panel, LDAP Users tab. Quick reminder, if you want to make changes, you have to edit them in the LDAP Groups tab and not in the Users tab. If you would like someone's name to not appear on the list, you can always click on the option Forget User in the LDAP Users tab, and you will stop seeing them here. Bear in mind that if that user is still a member of an LDAP group, the user will be able to log in even if you forgot them here. So if that is the intent, be sure to edit the LDAP groups as well. So what happens when people leave a company or an organization? Well, that's precisely the intent behind the LDAP integration. LDAP users are not deactivated and deleted from DDM. They are all managed within the LDAP database. So when this happens, typically the IT administrator deactivates them from the LDAP server, and they lose access to all company resources including DDM. The username may still appear in the LDAP users list, but they won't have access. This is also a way of denying access to users based on job changes. Now it's time to talk about another important feature that we can also have in Dante Domain Manager. We already know that DDM establishes a control layer on Dante traffic on your network. This is how we leverage the update log and alerts to stay on the top of changes in your system. But what if I told you there's a way to send this information into your existing monitoring platform? The feature we are talking about is SNMP. What is SNMP? SNMP stands for Simple Network Management Protocol and can be defined as an application layer protocol designed to monitor network infrastructure from a single pane of glass and provides administrators with device-centric visibility. SNMP is implemented on a wide range of hardware, including network devices such as switches, routers, gateways, servers, and also on endpoint equipment such as printers and computers. DDM has this functionality built into it, which means now we can have visibility into information about the network switches and the Dante devices within a single shared monitoring platform. So how does this work? Well, the way SNMP works is with the help of some components in the system. The first one is the SNMP manager, which is typically a computer or a server that is set up and used to run one or multiple types of network management systems. Basically, what it does is query the network and receive responses from the SNMP agents in the devices. Some of the most popular network management systems are SolarWinds, Prometheus, Splunk, and PRTG Network Monitor. The one we are going to use in our example will be PRTG. Then, other important component in the system is the managed devices, which are the devices that you are monitoring on the network. These can be servers, switches, computers, routers, printers, etc. Or in our case, the Dante devices. Then in those managed devices, there's a thing called an SNMP agent. The SNMP agent is a program that gets packed within a managed device that allows it to collect information from the device locally and then makes it available to the SNMP manager when it queries for it. So in a managed Dante system, the Dante Domain Manager server is actually the SNMP agent. The information you are looking for is extracted from the DDM system. Something to note is that the Dante Domain Manager is read-only. But what does this mean? SNMP can be used to write information to devices, but in our scenario, you can only monitor the DDM and not write to it. Every SNMP agent maintains an information database describing the managed device parameters. This information database is called MIB. And nope, we are not talking about the Men in Black. This stands for Management Information Base. And just like in the Men in Black, many questions could arise. The same happens here. The MIB is basically files that contain a set of questions that an SNMP manager can ask the agent. The SNMP manager uses this database to request the agent for specific information and further translates the information as needed for the network management system, or NMS. MIBs are arranged in a hierarchy expressed as an addressing system. Each address is called an object ID or just OID. The addresses relied on inheritance, so the root address is 1 and the nodes beneath would all start with 1 as well. For example, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and so on. The standard address for Internet resources in the addressing scheme is 1.3.6.1. And if you are a private company, 4. Enterprises companies are registered with 1. Ordinate is registered with 31,682. You can go to the Ordinate support website for DDM to download the MIB files. You find 2 MIBs. One is the Ordinate corporate registration, which tells you basically the number we saw in the previous slide. And the other one is the Dante Domain Manager MIB, which involves all of the parameters that you can actually query for. Just click in each one and then copy them into a TXT file. We're going to use them later to import them into the SNMP tool. Once you download the MIBs from the support portal, you will have to make the contents of the MIB available to an SNMP exporter. There are different ways to do this. You can do it by writing out those OID numbers. even though it can be a bit time-consuming and tedious, or the one we recommend, using computer applications that can help you to export it. Let's see an example of how PRTG imports the MIB files. To import the MIB files we have just downloaded, we must open the Pezler MIB imported software. Then go to the File menu and select Import MIB file. Select both TXT files and click Open. After that, you will see that it was successful. Now, if you select the Dante domain license, it will show you its information. For example, the OID and so on. Then we need to save it for PRTG network monitor into this directory root. Let's save it as DDM. Now, to finally start monitoring DDM in PRTG, for example, we just go to our PRTG tool and then select Setup, System Administration, Administrative Tools, and select Go from the Load Lookups and Files list. After that, we just have to come back to our Devices menu and add a new device under the root group for DDM, just in case it has not been auto-discovered after the installation. Let's call this DDM. Type its domain name, and that's it. Now we just have to add a sensor via the SNMP library sensor using the ddm.olif file generated by MIB importer. Remember to select all MIB modules from the Create window. The DDM supports two notifications or traps to indicate that the data has changed. One notification covers external services and core DDM functionality. The other covers health and connectivity of domains and devices. Upon notification, the MIB can be pulled by the external SNMP management system to identify the specifics of the change. This could trigger alarms or other actions like sending emails to specific people for specific domains. On the DDM side, in order to do all the SNMP integration, you need to go to the DDM Settings, External Services menu, and direct your DDM to the SNMP server. So first we must enable it, and then set up a community password for your SNMP server. After that, we will have to provide the contact details, for example, an email address, for your SNMP system administrator in the system contact. In the system location, you will have to provide information about the physical location of the SNMP server. For example, Rack 2 in server room B. Or like in our example, Dante Leon. And finally, save the changes. You then add a notification endpoint, an NMS, by clicking on the option Add Endpoint. That's where the DDM will send traps to all endpoints configured here. So for that, you must set up a host name or an IP address for the SNMP endpoint. If it were on your local network, it makes sense you use an IP address. But if these were over the public internet, it would make more sense to use a host name. And finally, we need to enter the port number that is used by the SNMP endpoint for incoming traps. This is typically 162. And by the way, it should be noted that DDM supports SNMP version 2. Once all this is configured, the DDM server's information will become available as an SNMP endpoint. If you go to the SNMP tool of your choice, like PRTG, you will be able to monitor some specific data from the DDM. This information is also available on the DDM web interface. But here in the SNMP tool, you can extract the information and generate any kind of alert filtering your work environment. For example, let's take the second node of our cluster and take it out. Here we see that it's healthy and working fine. But if I take that node down, the SNMP monitoring tool is going to react to that change and generate a change in the state of the domain node. As we can see now, the node state has changed to down because we took the server down. At this point, it's up to you as to how to react to an incident like this. Besides being able to monitor some health status for the DDM server, you can also monitor the status of a Dante domain, like when your devices go offline, latency errors, warnings, or clock errors. Basically, all the data that you should have within the DDM can be extracted. For example, now let's look at the hardware domain that has no offline devices. If we were to take one of the devices in that domain offline, we can now see the number of offline devices has changed to 1. What you do with this alert and how you respond is part of your support process. As you can see, DDM in integrating with external services provide you with the ability to have your managed Dante network coexist seamless with your network deployment. Hope you enjoyed this chapter.